Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service. It's Monday, July 26, 2021, and I have a very soggy forecast, especially for the west central areas of the state coming up here. But if you'd like additional weather information, you can always go online to weather.gov/Alaska, or for a recorded phone line forecast, 1-800-472-0391. And if you'd like to contact me with any interesting reports or photos or anything like that or questions, peter.chan@noaa.gov. Well, here are the weather headlines. Really haven't changed much from what I presented yesterday evening. Heavier rainfall is on the way and beginning now. West central areas, including the Seward Peninsula, extending inland to just about Bettles up along and north of the Yukon River. Anywhere from 1 to as much as 2 to 3 inches of rain will fall, especially tonight through early Wednesday. So some of the rivers and creeks there are going to see substantial rises in the next couple of days. Dry and warmer ridge is going to take shape over south central areas through midweek, so that's going to allow for less in the way of any scattered light showers, a little more sunshine and some warmer temperatures. Also, the southeast panhandle will finally be drying out, especially around Wednesday and through the end of the week. Still could be a widely scattered light shower here or there, but overall a drier trend. And right now it's still looking like August is going to start out cool and wet in the west, but warm and drier across the eastern portions of the state. And here are the precipitation forecasts coming up here for Tuesday and Wednesday. And let's focus in on Tuesday. Look at where we have the most greens and even some isolated areas of yellow, indicating rainfall amounts from the pre-dawn of this coming Tuesday morning through Tuesday night into the pre-dawn of Wednesday morning. Areas essentially Nome to Kotzebue on over to Bettles, and that would also include the Granite Mountain Air Station. Kobuk and Ambler could pick up some locally heavier rains in excess of 2 to nearly 3 inches, especially up in the higher elevations. And the rain will still be in place there and also spread a little further inland off toward the east. So much of the area along the Yukon River is going to get some pretty good rain, especially the west side of the state. That's also going to serve to reduce the fire danger, because it's been high all summer long there across east central areas, especially focused on the Yukon Flats along the Alcan border. But notice Tuesday we have a low risk for significant fire potential, and then after the rains move in, it drops off up there through the Yukon Flats with little or no risk, and still a little pocket there along the eastern arm of the Alaska Range toward the Alcan border. But you can see fire danger significantly coming down across much of the state here compared to what it was in the east central areas just a week and two ago. On the satellite imagery, we continue to watch low pressure, weak low pressure there west-southwest of AKwx and the southeast panhandle. Still a few lingering light showers associated with that. We also still have some showers up toward Yakutat and even in south central areas, but not near the coverage of what they were earlier a few days ago. And if we look further west, the bright white clouds, the enhancement there to the cloud tops, cooler cloud tops, we're getting a pretty good push of warmer air coming in off the Bering Sea. A couple of frontal systems and troughs moving through the west side of the state will enhance that rainfall, even though the warmer temperatures won't translate to the surface. In fact, being stuck under the clouds and rain, you're only going to see temperatures holding steady between the upper 40s to maybe mid 50s here for the next few days there in the west. So rather dreary weather and very wet. As I said, some areas could pick up as much as 2 to 3 inches of rain. A couple of weak areas, troughs of low pressure also moving through, just passing now to the southern tip there of the Alaska Peninsula and then back out toward the Aleutians. But by far the most significant weather feature is low pressure over eastern Russia, and with it a couple of frontal systems that are going to be rotating up through the western half of the state here between now and on Wednesday, bringing with it some significant rainfall. So here's the weather map today. We do see an area of high pressure, weak high pressure out over the western Gulf, weak ridge extending northward. Still, that's serving to trap moisture in the low levels, especially keeping a marine layer and some fog in place over the northern Gulf, including Prince William Sound and along the east side of the Kenai. Also, again, tonight, if there's some clearing, it could cause some denser fog to form in portions of the central panhandle, as what happened in the Petersburg area early this Monday morning could repeat again tonight. if we can get some of the clouds above to clear out. But otherwise, back to the west, rainy weather there from the Yukon Delta on up through the Seward Peninsula and up into the western half of the Brooks Range. That's where some of the most substantial rainfall will be here overnight tonight and into the day Tuesday and lingering into Wednesday. So kind of called a warm front, not really much of a warm front. There's definitely warmer air aloft coming in, creating periods of moderate to heavy rain tonight into Tuesday there and through the west. We'll continue to see weak high pressure out over along essentially the ridge extending along the south coast of Alaska from near Kodiak Island all the way arching up to Prince William Sound to the British Columbia coast, and that's going to keep the marine layer going with just a few widely scattered lighter showers as we go into the day on Tuesday, lingering especially in parts of the southeast panhandle. But more importantly, one frontal system lifts through the west. It'll become breezier along the west coast with small craft advisories, maybe even some gusts to near gale force. And then the primary frontal system crossing through the western Bering, that is going to move eastward. The occluded front will be in the process of weakening as it pushes onshore through the west coast on Wednesday, but along it bands of rain continuing, and as I said, under the cloud cover and periods of rain, it's going to be cool, wet weather there across the western part of the state, and some of that moisture is going to work its way farther east all the way into east central areas, thereby really reducing the fire risk across the Yukon Flats that has been so dry this late spring and much of the summer. Low temperatures Tuesday morning will generally be in the lower 50s across the inner canals there of the southeast and generally across much of south central parts of the state, and we'll get readings across the region back up most areas in the 60s except for maybe right along the immediate coast, looking at maybe 65 there at Haines and Juneau, 65 at Anchorage, and further west 63 at best for McGrath, with many areas west of there only in the 50s. Lows Wednesday morning will generally be around 50 in the southeast and lower 50s across south central areas, and still temperatures generally holding on into the 60s, though if you get a few peaks of sun, could get readings upper 60s, isolated 70-degree reading not out of the question, though at least some drying is going to begin for both the south central and southeast panhandle. Well, lows for Tuesday morning will be upper 30s to lower 40s along the Arctic coast. Mid 40s to around 50 the Seward Peninsula, and generally upper 40s to lower 50s the Yukon Valley. Still could see a 70-degree reading at Fort Yukon, Eagle, or down toward Northway, but otherwise beneath the clouds and periods of steadier rain. Temperatures are going to be confined mainly to the 50s Tuesday afternoon. That's going to mean temperatures don't fall that much at night. We could see lows generally through the Yukon Valley back toward the Seward Peninsula, mid 40s to near 50 degrees. And then on Wednesday, we could get some readings south of the Yukon River where the rain has let up a bit, back up into the upper 60s to maybe near 70 degrees just north of the Alaska range. And then looking at the southwest, lows will generally be in the lower 50s going up the Yukon River and the Kuskokwim rivers. Upper 40s to near 50 degrees, the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. And then Tuesday afternoon, temperatures will generally stay in the 50s for highs, maybe 63 or so at McGrath, but that would be about it, 65 King Salmon. And Wednesday morning lows will, again, not much temperature variation with the cloud cover and periods of rain across southwest interior. Lows lower 50s. Lows will be upper 40s to around 50 across the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. And at least in the southwest, maybe just on the other side of the Alaska range, could see a few readings in the mid 60s. Maybe an isolated 70-degree reading, but it's at least going to start to dry out along the southern coast and just the interior south central as that ridge of high pressure takes better grip. So here is the temperature outlook. We're not seeing a whole lot of change as I was showing you last week going up through the end of July into early August. This is for August 1st through the 5th. Temperatures are expected to average above normal, especially across the eastern half of the state. And here's the bummer for the west, I guess, if you're already going to get soaked here this week, especially the first half of the week. looking rather wet as low pressure will be broad low pressure out over the Bering, will be pumping moisture up in through the western third of the state. So the Seward Peninsula, the YK deltas, the southwest interior are looking to be rather wet here as we begin the month of August. And I wish I had some drier news for you, but that's the way it's shaking out, with drier conditions expected in the east along the Alcan border.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving along to your flying weather, if you are planning a flight Tuesday into Wednesday, well, the most active region will be across the western coast into the interior as a result of low pressure over Russia, bringing in a trough and then a frontal system that's going to produce some locally heavy rainfall, especially through west central areas, including the Seward Peninsula. Some locations there could see as much as 2 to locally 3 inches of rainfall now through Wednesday. Otherwise, south portions of the state, we will have a ridge of high pressure trying to reestablish itself, mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, but that will keep a marine layer along the Gulf. And very weak circulation remains to the southwest of the southeast panhandle out over the southeastern Gulf with a few scattered light showers. So going through the Tuesday afternoon, look for extensive IFR conditions across the interior of the west into central areas along and north of the Yukon River. Areas of IFR across the northern Gulf, including Prince William Sound, and then back across much of the Aleutians. For Wednesday morning, the interior west still will have areas of IFR along south of the Brooks Range and along the west coast. Also, IFR conditions continue along coastal areas of the Gulf, especially Prince William Sound eastward into the southeast outer coast. And then Wednesday afternoon, we'll still see some areas of IFR out over the northern Gulf and rather widespread areas of MVFR through the Yukon Valley, though I wouldn't doubt there'll be some areas of IFR as well with the precipitation that have moved inland. Past conditions, Anaktuvuk will be IFR, no surprise there. Same thing for Adigan, IFR conditions on Tuesday. Lake Clark and Merrill will be MVFR with VFR conditions possible, especially the east entrances there for the afternoon hours on Tuesday. Otherwise, Rainy Pass should generally be MVFR, as will Windy Pass. And as we head further east, Isabel should manage to hold on to VFR conditions, as will Mentasta. And then heading southwestward, Tanita, MVFR conditions are expected on Tuesday. And Portage is going to be kind of a split. Generally MVFR through the pass. On the west entrance could briefly be VFR there for Tuesday afternoon, and then tendency on the east entrance will be to go from MVFR to IFR conditions, as we do anticipate IFR conditions across Prince William Sound. And then looking there in the northern panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see MVFR conditions become VFR later in the morning and afternoon. Freezing levels are generally around 8,000 feet across the central interior of Alaska, a bit below 8,000 feet across the southeast panhandle. And then as we go further west out across the Bering, freezing levels come up on the backside of frontal system with low pressure over eastern Russia. You can see freezing levels around or above 14,000 feet across the central and western Aleutians. Greatest potential for icing will be between 12,000 feet and a flight level of 18,000 feet across west central areas back into eastern Russia. And there could be some isolated icing around portions of the southern half of the southeast panhandle between 10 and 16,000 feet, and some scattered light showers. Heaviest rain again will be across the west central coast and interior. Strongest upper level winds now moving across the western and northern Bering upwards to 85 knots at 30,000 feet. And then also we have on the backside of a low over the Gulf, 65 knot winds along Kodiak Island there out over the western Gulf. And then dropping down to mid-levels, we have a circulation there, a mid-level high pressure there near Kodiak Island. That ridging is going to build over south central areas, which should allow for a little more pleasant weather and drier conditions as we head through midweek across south central areas. But there is a core of mid-level winds up over 50 knots out there over the northern and central Bering, heading inland there, so there will be turbulence along the west coast. And there at 3,000 feet, you can really see The core of those stronger winds in excess of 50 to 55 knots from around St. Lawrence Island down to St. Matthew, and that core of stronger southwesterly winds will be moving onshore into the western coast associated with that frontal system as that low sits there over eastern Russia. And taking a look, yes, that's where the greatest potential for turbulence will exist, surface to 4,000 feet. Anywhere from the central interior, west central interior, through the west coast, Seward Peninsula, with perhaps isolated severe turbulence around St. Lawrence Island down toward St. Matthew. And we could also see pockets of turbulence surface to 4,000 feet in through the western Aleutians.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. Okay. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
And the foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Ends. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator.
Okay.
So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
Kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. and then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower.
Yeah.
It has to. That's the laws of motion, and such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a a constant frame of reference.
Right.
And you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long range view that's looking top down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at GINA, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
In our weather segment this evening, we start out with the sea ice edge. We still have a little bit of brash ice out there in the lower Chukchi Sea from some ice that broke away from the Russian coast. Otherwise, areas along the Arctic coast are free of pack ice, and we'll just have some marginal ice along there as we head through this week. It looks fairly open. Wane right now on up to Point Barrow, so the navigational water should be more open there. Well, in the southeast to start out Tuesday's marine forecast, winds will be southeast to south 10 to 15 knots, the inner canals 2 to 3 footers, and along the Gulf Coast, winds southeast around 10 knots or even more variable as you get up to Yakutat, with waves generally only running 3 to 4 feet at best. And on Wednesday, winds will be a little more variable across the inner canals, 5 to 10 knots and waves a couple of feet. And same thing as we get along the Gulf Coast, winds variable 5 to 10 knots, so maybe more northerly there between Gustavus down to south of Sitka, with waves still only around a few feet. South central areas, variable winds as well to start out in the north end of the Gulf there. Prince William Sound, only 2-foot waves. As we get out into Cook Inlet, winds will have a southerly component, south-southwest, 15 to near 20 knots, a little channeling, waves 3 to perhaps as 4 or 5 feet in some areas. And on Wednesday, we'll continue to see a southerly component to the winds going up through Cook Inlet, with waves again 4 to maybe 5 feet. And areas, though, further east of the Kenai and on up south of Cordova, variable winds around 10 knots and waves only 2 to 3 feet. On Tuesday, across the Alaska Peninsula into Kodiak Island, we'll see southwest winds 15 to 20 knots there around Kodiak Island, with maybe 4 to 5 footers there in Shelikof Strait. Otherwise, on the Bering side, winds will be southwest to south and pick up to 25 knots out there toward the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, with waves running 3 to 4 feet, Cold Bay, False Pass. And then as an occluded front approaches through the central portion of the Bering, and on Wednesday, we'll see winds turn southeasterly across much of the area, 15 to 20 knots on the Pacific side, 4 to 6 foot waves, and southeast 20 to 30 knots on the Bering side with 4 to 6 foot waves also. Across the Aleutians on Tuesday, the eastern Aleutians, southeast to south winds generally in the 15 to 20 knot range, waves 4 to 5 feet on the North Pacific, 3-4 feet on the Bering side, and southwesterly 20 to 25 knots west of Adak through Kiska and Shemya. Waves could build up over 8 to near 9 feet there west of Kiska on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, Southerly winds, kind of the tail end of that occluded front brushing the central eastern Aleutians. Southerly winds 20 to maybe 30 knots there north of Dutch Harbor. Waves 4 to 6 feet on the Bering side, 5-6 feet on the North Pacific, turning more west to northwest through the western Aleutians there at 15 knots and waves 7 to 8 feet. This is where more of the action will be in the west coast as that occluded front approaches Tuesday. Winds picking up 25 to 30 knots from St. Paul and St. George on up toward St. Lawrence Islands, and waves building north of St. Paul from 5 feet to 8 to 11 feet as you get up to St. Lawrence. And then on Wednesday, we could see southerly winds right out ahead of that occluded front to near gale force to 35 knots, especially from just west of Nunavik Island on up to east of St. Lawrence to there between Norton Sound, and waves building on the order of 10 to 13 feet. And as we go through Tuesday, across the northwest and Arctic coast, winds will be turning southerly and picking up 25 to 30 knots through the Bering Strait, waves building 6 to 11 feet south of the strait. And then as we head through Wednesday, that occluded front kind of pivot point coming up through there, 35-knot gales off of Nome and Port Clarence there with 13-foot waves. And then as we get up along the Arctic coast, winds will tend to be more out of the southeast and east at 15 to 20 knots before turning more back toward the southeast as we get up there. Just generally along the northwest coast, waves generally around 4 to 5 feet, with most of the action coming there through the strait southward. So a quick check of the weather maps. For this Monday night, we have sort of a warm front lifting in through west central areas. It's going to transition. It's weakening to more of a trough, bringing rounds of moderate to locally heavier rainfall tonight into Tuesday. And that front will lift northeastward and then kind of wash out into a trough. Meanwhile, occluded front will be taking shape on Tuesday out through the central Bering Sea, as low pressure is located over far eastern Russia, and that'll be the main weather system going through the day on Wednesday, with the occluded front bringing some gustier, perhaps near gale force winds upwards to 35 knots along portions of the west coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.